Look, I just got the letter on Friday, and I didn't know how to tell you.
I'm really happy for you. Okay. Okay. Let's go have some fun.
Alright guys, welcome back to the channel. It's been a long time since we've done a ecodiesel video. I finally got around to doing my rear brake pads on my 2014 Ram 1500. These are original brake pads, so they're 7 years old, 215,000 kilometers on them. I'll show you a close-up. They're pretty haggard, but they actually got a bit of meat left on them, which is kind of alarming. But I ended up removing the rear pads, removing the rotors, cleaning them up, and then I ended up bleeding the brakes as well. This video is just going to be removing the rear pads and the rear rotors. They can be a little bit tricky. Tools for the job, pretty straightforward. You need 10 millimeter. 10 millimeter to remove the slide pins on the caliper, 2 of those. So you can take the caliper off. And then to remove the caliper mount bracket that holds the caliper to the hub, you got your 21 millimeter. Alright, I recommend you get yourself a breaker bar, because the 21 millimeter bolt heads, they're on there from the factory like super tight with blue Loctite, so they're tricky to get off. What else you gonna need? You know, small little ratchet for your sockets. You're gonna need various sprays. Like I would recommend you get obviously brake parts cleaner to spray your rotors down and all your brake stuff, so you don't got brake dust flying all over the place. Penetrate wouldn't hurt for the bolts on the for the bracket, because they can be kind of stubborn. You also might need a torch to get your rotors off. I didn't need them, but if your rotors end up, or like if they're really stuck on there, you're going to need to torch them, and you're going to need to give them a whack with the rubber mallet, or depending, you may need a mini sludge. When I first took my front rotors off my truck, I ended up breaking a stud because I wound up and smashed them so hard. Like, they are on there. Like, definitely you want to remove all your rotors right away on your truck, clean the rust, and put the you know, whatever kind of grease you want, or copper anti-seize will work good. I just got this general purpose automotive grease that I use. Obviously you'll need your pads. I'll put a link in the description for an Amazon Associates pad, so if you need pads and you don't mind supporting the channel, you can buy them from me. Would definitely helps the channel out. Other than that, you know, it's pretty basic. I used a drill to get the inside of my rotors all cleaned up, and the hub face. Just a little bit quicker than getting in there with the old toothbrush. And yeah, that's pretty much it. We'll get into the video now. It's pretty straightforward. Just follow along. And yeah, if you have any questions, leave them below. Methods I use for taking the rear tires off. Usually I'll use the second method, which is just jacking up the rear diff. You know, there's not a whole pile of weight on the rear end of these things. Jacking up the rear diff, and I'll put my 2 jack stands right underneath the rear axle in case something happens, but I leave the weight on the jack, and I just extend the jack stands as high as it'll go. And pop your 2 tires off, and we'll get ready to remove the rotors. Alright guys, so you've got your tire removed. It's pretty straightforward if you've never done your brakes before. I mean, it's a beginner's guide, so we'll just explain how the brakes work. You got your hydraulic hoses here, okay? That basically, when you press on your pedal, it comes in and it pushes a cylinder in here, or piston rather, which actually squeezes your brake pads together on the rotor. Pretty self-explanatory, but in case you didn't know, that's how she goes. Changing the actual brake pads is very simple. Getting the rotors off can be a pain in the nuts. So first thing I would recommend you do, once you got your tire off, is come in here with your penetrating fluid, like your PB Blaster or whatever product you plan on using, and just spray down the two big bolts here and here. These are your caliper mount bolts, because they can be pretty tricky. Next thing you're going to want to do is spray down the entire brake pad, or the rotor, and try and get in behind the pads. Just want to get rid of a lot of the brake dust, you know what I mean? That stuff is no good for you. Get her in there a little bit, you know. The idea is to kind of spray it and it clumps together, and then you won't be breathing as much of it in, hopefully. First thing you want to remove for bolts, you got your 10mm for your caliper sliders, the slide pins rather. So go ahead, remove those. Pull your slide bolts right out, your slide pins rather. Now from here you should be able to get your caliper off of the caliper mount. Just going to give her a couple light taps with the hammer, a little left and right. What I usually do is get right in there with a screwdriver and just pry the back of the caliper off, okay? Now these brakes are original. The pads are anyhow, so there's 215,000 kilometers on these brake pads. Alright, so you got your caliper here. You know the old saying, you don't want it to hang off the hoses. So go ahead, tuck it up, and you can kind of lay it on the top, the rear axle there, okay? And now you've got your, what can only be described as the nastiest pads ever. If you're just going to change your pads, all you got to do is get in here and wiggle these pads out. Take your screwdriver, just go gently if you're going to be reusing your rotors. And these just they slide right out of the there. Now there's actually a decent amount of meat on these still. Now this inner pad is definitely a bit of a pain in the nuts. You kind of got to wiggle it back and forth, especially if it's rusted on the clips there. It doesn't want to move very freely. So I just took a screwdriver, I worked it back and forth, and I was able to pop it right off. So she's out. So from here, if you wanted to, you would just basically remove your clips. Basically, to remove these, you should just be able to poke at these little ears. Give her a little love tap. Try not to breathe any dust in. And they just pop right off. Pretty simple. These ones aren't actually in all that bad shape, but I got new ones, so I'll change them. So now what I'm going to do is remove the rotor, okay? So I'm actually not going to be changing these rotors. I'm just going to clean them up. But for instance, if you had like a warped rotor or something like that, you might want to go ahead and change them. So to get the rotor free, it's trapped in the caliper mount. So you got to remove these two giant 21mm bolts. Now you may want to do yourself a favor and get yourself a breaker bar. I pretty much guarantee you these are going to be on like insanely tight. Woo. So yeah, you know, you're pushing down, so just make sure you're on there. Don't slip off, smash your face off the brakes. It'll be good. This thing just fits in the wheel well. Actually, it doesn't even. Fuck. Oh, alright. That was a bit much. Now, I'm pretty sure these should have like Loctite on them or something. Yeah, blue Loctite. So there's your caliper off. And now we get the pleasure of trying to knock off this rotor. Now what you're going to want to do is you should probably suspend your caliper. You know, you could leave it up there if you want to, but honestly, it's better just to hang it. So you can put a piece of wire through. I got this whole piece of house wiring, you know, Romex or something. Some guys use a coat hanger. Just tighten that up there, and kind of what I do is I just hang it off the spring usually. Because you're going to start whacking this rotor, so something like that. So, you know, what I would recommend you do if you're watching this video and you're just trying to, you know, do a little preventative maintenance. I did this pretty much after my first set of pads in the front. I actually went ahead, I took everything apart, and I lubricated where the hub touches the rotor so that it won't seize as bad. But I have a good feeling this is going to be on there pretty good. What you're going to want to do is get yourself a rubber mallet. You can also use just a regular hammer. Just, you know, do not hit these studs, okay? Like, my fronts were so bad I accidentally damaged the threads on one of my studs, and it's a pain in the nuts to change them. So do yourself a favor. If you're worried, you can actually put the nuts back on, and you're less of a chance of damaging them. But with the rubber mallet, it's not so bad. So you're just going to want to give everything a couple love taps. Also on the top around here, because this is where the actual e-brake sits. There's a, you know, for your emergency brake, it extends out and it rubs on the inside of this. It's almost like it's like drum brakes pretty much. Now I can see it starting to move. Oh, there we go. Oh. Yeah, I can still see some of my grease from, well, I don't know, probably 5-6 years ago. I put her on pretty heavy. Got a pile of brake dust in there, so make sure when you're pulling those off you don't disturb anything and end up breathing it in. So that's the rotor off. So now I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to just take my sandpaper again, I'm going to clean the surface again, clean the inside of the rotor, and put the rotor back on. I might go ahead and spray some lubricant on the inside of the e-brake. There's lots of moving parts and stuff in there. Like, you can see this spring looks pretty rusty, so, you know, don't spray the actual shoes themselves, obviously, right, because you rely on those to stop when you got the e-brake on. So just the inside, right, get some of the inside stuff a little bit lubed up. Alright, so I went ahead, I took my little grinder on a drill actually, and I cleaned up the surface again, the inside quite a bit. I can see I used copper anti-seize last time. I'm going to switch it up this time. I got this general purpose automotive grease. I'm going to coat the inside of the rotor. Just a little light film, you know. I mean, eventually I'm going to have to change these, but not today. Now try not to get any on the inside, right? Like we're saying, this is like a drum brake as well. So if you put grease on the walls, then you're really not going to have much of an e-brake. Which won't do much for you. That's her. Now, if you're having a really hard time taking your rotor off, I haven't had to do it, but you can actually adjust the brakes on these from the back of the rotor. So I haven't had to do it, but on the passenger side there's a there's a little grommet on the back of these rotors. You pull that out, and then there's a kind of like a gear with teeth, and you can actually work the e-brake back. I never messed with it because I don't really want to adjust the e-brakes. I just want to leave them like they are. So if you're having a hard time, you can also take some fire to this, take a torch, heat it up, pound the shit out of it. They will come off, alright? The The ones on my front, like, they were seized so bad. Like I said, I I hit a stud. So just take your time. You know, they will come off. You just got to be persistent. So from here, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to mount my caliper bracket again with my 21 millimeter. Now the caliper mounting bolts, the 21 mil, I'm not 100% sure what the torque settings are, but I want to say like it should be in the 130 to 40 range. Like, it's quite a bit. It's about as much as your tires. And, you know, for good reason. You know, it's holding the whole brake system onto the, well, the hub really. But so I got a torque wrench, and I'll set her up for 140, and we'll put 140 on those, and then we'll get going on changing the pads. Alright, so I got my torque wrench, and I'm gonna set it for like I'll put 140 on. I don't care. There it is. Alright, there's 140. Alright, so we're back. I put the 140 on like you saw. Now I'm ready to, before I untie this, I'll go ahead and take my large channel locks, slip joint pliers technically, and slowly compress the piston in, okay? This is so I can make some room for my new pads, because new pads are much thicker, and I'll have to make some room on this side so that I can actually get them on the rotor. So, and what I did is I popped the hood, I opened up the cap for the brake reservoir. It's not necessary. Some people think it's a good idea, some don't. I plan on bleeding the brakes on this thing, so I'm already halfway there. So that's what I'm going to do. You can leave yours closed as long as, because basically right now you're going to be pumping fluid back into the reservoir. And let's just say you had a spongy pedal, you filled the reservoir, and now you're pushing more fluid back. You could end up bubbling over. It's going to go through the breather on the top of the cap. But you know, just have an eye on it. Mine's pretty low, so I'm not too worried about that. So I'm just going to go nice and easy. And it'll go in quite a bit. Like, it looks bottomed out right now, but she still has a bit more in her. Now what we're going to do is untie your electrical cable, your coat hanger, whatever you use to tie this thing up. Alright, so I untied my caliper. I got my new clips here for the mounting bracket. And they only go on one way, so, you know, I got this overhang here, so I'm going to go ahead and wiggle it in. Alright, so what I've done is I put a little bit of lube on my ears, they're called, of the pads, because that's what actually slides inside of on this clip back and forth. So when you come off the brakes, you know, you want that little bit of lubrication so it can go back and forth. So now these are kind of tricky to get in. You just gotta wiggle them in. There it goes. Get tight in there. Alright, so a little bit of work off camera there, but you know, you wiggle your pads in. I lubricated my clips even more because I didn't like how these weren't really sliding back and forth, but they're not bad now, so that's okay. So now we're going to go ahead, press them firmly together, and get your caliper ready. Careful you don't kink your hose. It only wants to go on one way, right? And you're going to slide your caliper over your pads, and because you compressed your caliper so much, you'll be all right. I need a lift. Alright, got my bottom one on there. There she be. Just gotta give her a little love tap, you know. Now I don't know what the torque specs are for the 10 mil slide bolts, but you know, I'm gonna give it a little bit of an umph, but nothing crazy. Alright, so that's your you know, new calipers or new rotors and new pads. Now last step to do here is just to spray it all down with some parts cleaner, just in case you got some grease on the on the rotor or on the pads, you know, try to get in there, do that. Now, do not forget to torque your caliper mount bolts, okay? Put 140 pounds on it, felt pretty good, so you should probably install Loctite, but you know, I just used what was left that was on there. So yeah, at this point, go ahead, reinstall your wheel, and we'll do a little recap. Alright, well, that's it for this video, guys. I really appreciate everybody who's been subscribing and watching the videos over the last year and a half or so. You know, we started this channel, I started it mostly just for fun, and it is still just for fun. Really, mostly I started it so I can do these how-to videos, and then I have my own reference for later, because you know, I have a tendency to forget how to do stuff. So, you know, like for instance, you know, if I forget something, I can go back and watch my own video. And I've got documentation for it. So I hope these videos have been helping you out with the truck. Yeah, you know, this channel has been kind of like a mix between homesteading vlog stuff, like outside. We got this 10-acre property out in Niagara Falls, Canada side. And the other half has been like these how-to videos. So, you know, we do a lot of our own equipment maintenance and stuff, between tractors, motorcycles, you know, trucks, and all sorts of good stuff that comes rolling through here. So, you know, just trying to spread a lot of knowledge out there. So just want to say thanks again to everybody who's supported the channel over the last bit, and we're going to keep pumping out more ecodiesel videos. I've recently finally got my EGR leak. Although my EGR is disabled through the emissions tune that I have for my truck, the actual seal on the unit seems to be leaking like everybody else's. So I'm going to do a real nice long video on how to remove the EGR completely, plate it off. Just got to get around to ordering the parts. It's COVID-19 right now, so getting anything is just about impossible. So look out for that one, and I'll catch you on the next video. Take care.